Thought Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Jacqueline Timmer, and today we have with us Bishop Aubrey Shines. Bishop Aubrey Shines is the founder of G2G Ministries, as well as conservative Clergy of Color. He is an author, speaker, pastor, and a political conservative voice speaking to the racial tension as well as the American identity as a whole. Bishop Shines, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining.
Fantastic being with you. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks again.
Awesome. Well, it's great to speak with you as always, but I wanted to start off, you just recently released a new book speaking to the racial tension, and I believe it's 8 questions. Would you mind expounding upon that a little bit and talking us through those questions?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me just take a few. One, it's really been a fantastic moment with this book. As of just a few days ago, we're actually number 2 on the Christian adult reading on Amazon. And that's just really with only about a week into this here. So the book is catching on fire, and we're excited, of course, about that. Several of the questions that I ask, we actually hear in the framework of our media every day. Unfortunately, the way we are listening and hearing is not what they are unfortunately sharing with us. Case in point, we often hear about what is called systemic racism. I address issues of that magnitude by simply saying that, sure, there has been systemic racism. And if we're going to be diplomats in this journey, we're going to have to also use some element of civility and honesty with some integrity here. And what we'll find out in a nutshell is that there has been systemic racism in America, and we can all identify it, unfortunately, to one party. That is the Democratic Party. It is the party that fought against the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. It's the same party, by the way, that gave us the Jim Crow laws, the KKK. And we still see, unfortunately, this identity politic being lived out in certain candidates. Take, for instance, Joe Biden. It was Joe who recently said that if you were Black or brown and you did not vote a specific way, then you're really not Black or brown. Again, the same mantra that has been used for a few centuries here with the Democratic Party. They're still doing the same thing. A real seed of divisiveness that we are watching unfold. This is why I took time to begin to address these topics, and it is to equip not just Blacks, not just whites, but all Americans, regardless of one's ethnicity, as to what's really going on and how do we answer questions when we're faced with them. There's a shutdown. No one wants to talk about it. If you do, you're considered a racist. Well, that doesn't bode well with someone like me because I fit 2 narratives. I happen to have a dad that's biologically that's Black and a mom biologically that's Jewish. So I'm not sure they know what to do with this conundrum that I present to them. But we are addressing those issues. And I believe this is one of the reasons why the book is having tremendous success in the market right now.
A huge part of your book, if I understand correctly, is specifically addressing Black Lives Matter
Yes.
from a Christian standpoint. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, what I do in a nutshell, I point out that it is impossible to be part of, support Black Lives Matter, and be what is called unapologetically adhering to any type of Judeo-Christian ethos. Case in point, the Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization. That's not my opinion. This is what they say about themselves. Marxism only identifies individuals by groups. Well, that's anti-God because God gives us each an individual identity. And he doesn't deal with the Black or the white or the brown or the yellow. As a matter of fact, those of us who adhere to a Judeo ethos as it relates to Christian ethos as well, we realize that by one blood have every race been created. So we don't adhere to the Black Lives Matter because, again, they're anti-God. They don't believe in family. They don't believe that what we know as heterosexual relationship between male, female, producing children, they actually adhere to individuals that have various challenges mentally as it relates to whether or not they can even figure out on any given day. And I don't mean that in any condescending way, but they are dealing with individuals that on any day will choose to be male, female, love a car, love an animal, love a tree. Well, those are anti-God narratives. This is why I address in the book that Black Lives Matter is totally a contradiction to anything that we understand as it relates to, again, a Judeo-Christian ethos. It's just totally off kilter, and we're showing that it is estranged from anything that is historical as we know it.
I don't know if I've given you this context before, Bishop Shines, but actually the rise of BLM is my reentry into politics. It's what inspired that for me. My husband is light-skinned, his mother is Black, and he was called up to the National Guard to deal with the riots, and then BLM arose, and they were speaking on behalf and creating this narrative on behalf of the Black people. And the impact that it had on me was feeling like a voice to actually address racial issues in America was suddenly being stolen, and it's like the air was sucked out of the room. But with BLM, it seems like there's almost this parallel with the KKK, where it's this power-hungry, driven movement that's not actually concerned about race, but is using racial tensions in order to instill fear and separation. And both are more or less conjurings, if you will, of the Democrat Party. Do you see those as being similar or dissimilar, and why or why not?
Well, first of all, they're similar. Number two, welcome back to the political fray. I
Thank you.
hate that. I hate that that's what brought you back, but man, am I really glad that you're back. I can identify with, again, when you juxtapose these two ideologies, what you'll find is there is no juxtapositioning here at all. The Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization. Well, so was the KKK. They were driven by identity. So is the BLM. And so what are they trying to do? They're trying to shame whites from saying, well, you're automatically superior because look at your ethnicity. But if you go back and study Stalinism and any other form of false government, by the way, that my grandfather fought in a war, died in a war, World War II, that is, to make sure that each of us were free from this tyranny, you'll find that BLM, no different than the KKK, they're doing the same exact thing. By the way, same organizations. Isn't that interesting? KKK, the Democratic Party. Well, guess who now the BLM supports? The Democratic Party. So there's no parallel here. Again, there's no juxtaposition saying, well, if you take the pendulum and you swing it one way, you won't find them. Oh, sure you will. You will find them at the center. Why? They're doing the same thing. They're trying to divide us by race. Again, implying there's no God, because God doesn't deal with the whole race thing. It's just not part of God's narrative. And one that has a master's in this, I can tell you, it doesn't exist. God was never interested in the whole color thing at all. Now, with that being said, when you see groups like BLM and Antifa and others, they're funded, by the way, by organizations, parties, countries that have one purpose only: to divide America. So when I hear the false narrative out there, at least alleging, well, look at where we are right now, and whites over here and blacks over here. Let me remind your audience, and I'm sure you have, but just bear with me. When a Black man and a Black woman wait to have children, as does a white man and a white woman, and they bring children into this union called marriage, and they're both educated, here's the reality: there are no inequalities. There's difference in the employment. There's zero difference in that particular group. If you want to segment them into ethnicities, there's zero difference in those groups, by the way, rising to the top and having success in those families. But you'll never hear that. Now, why does BLM have this type of bite? It's because the mainstream media pushes it. They're pushing the narrative for a purpose. It keeps them relevant. And forgive me for adding on, I often think of Booker T. Washington, one of my heroes, at least during the 1800s. He said something fascinating. He said, there are a group of individuals that do not want to see the race issue resolved. Then he answers it rhetorically. Why? He says, because it makes them relevant and it keeps them in a place of power. So they don't want it to happen. This is why you have, again, Black Lives Matter, the Al Sharptons, the Jesse Jacksons, and then they use the foot soldiers like the Colin Kaepernicks, the LeBron James. For what purpose? Because it creates this illusion that, oh my God, we're so divided. No, when that Black man takes care of his children, there's zero difference in him and any other man. And that is just the reality. And again, that's not my opinion, by the way. Those are the bare facts. And this is why I took time to write the book. And this is why, in my opinion, I think the book is doing very, very well. It's equipping people to say, oh my God, I finally have an argument. And now I know how to address my neighbors, my friends, my family, etc. And again, I look at the small book that I produce as a framework to make sure that this happens. So don't buy the hype, don't drink the Kool-Aid. We're not as divided as they say they are. We are. Here's the reality. We must fight to preserve this great union. And this is why, my dear, I do the work that I do.
With your book, so many people in America right now feel like their voice has been completely stolen. Like I said, the air being sucked out of the room, if you will, by an overarching narrative that doesn't represent their political beliefs or ideology. You just spoke to how your book is more or less lending to giving a voice or giving an articulation to the concerns of people, which is a beautiful way of looking at that. What do you think our next steps forward are as a nation in restoring the American voice in contrast to cancel culture?
Well, I think we're going to have to unite. One, I think people have to get out and vote because, again, our representatives are supposed to represent the specific views that we hold dear. Well, we can't sit back and hope things get better. You got to engage. And this is why individuals that have been, for whatever the reason, probably got burnt out through politics and thought, oh, I can't do this. And maybe the church shouldn't be involved. Let me remind your audience of something. And I take this really as a badge of honor. Conservative Clergy of Color, because we're 501c3, we don't endorse any particular candidate. However, as a citizen of the United States of America, I do. A few years ago, I traveled with then candidate Trump. I spoke in just numerous auditoriums around the nation. Phenomenal time, but I use that only as a reference point for this. When we are engaged, this is what your audience is going to have to understand. Sometimes it becomes a lot of opposition that finds itself, unfortunately, part of that paradigm. When I did the work that I did, there was a lady that ran against Donald Trump. Her name was Hillary Clinton. And she wrote a book, and this is what she said in her book. She gave the reasons why she lost the election. In all of the United States of America, there was one clergy guy that she said was one of the reasons that she lost. You're looking at him. She named me by name and says, because of that Bishop Aubrey Shines. I mean, she literally said,
you cut me off because this was my next question, Bishop Shines. So this is perfect. Keep going.
Well, she did, and Jacqueline, what was so interesting about it, she put in there, because I produced a video. Now, if you ever listen, by the way, I don't recommend buying your book just to hear that clip. I could send it to you for free, and I'm sure we have it on one of our many media outlets. But when she did that, I took a backlash. We had to get FBI involved. There were people that were going to come and protest us and try to create some chaotic, chaos, some sort of havoc. Well, again, this is not a threat, but we're Floridian boys down here. We believe in the Second Amendment. You probably don't want to do it. Not down here. We're not the passive group. I'm part of that Christianity that we kind of turn over the tables if necessary to protect our loved ones. And so your audience has to understand silence is not an option. Being docile, it's not an option. Being passive, it's not an option. There must be a real, what I believe, a real flow of the DNA that this nation was founded upon. And what was that? We created peaceably, by the way, change. We don't burn down things to make our point and set buildings afire, but we do go to the polls. We do find candidates that represent our views, and we got to unite to do that. Black and white, brown, yellow. We got to come together and say, hey, stop being silent. If you do, we're going to lose this nation. Jacqueline, I'd rather die fighting to preserve this nation than to see this great nation just go up in smoke because of these Marxist elements that are unfortunately permeating the landscape of our society.
How did you emerge onto the political scene? You're a pastor, you love church history. How did you get involved?
Well, it was some years ago. I was doing some things. This is so interesting. Someone else asked me that question not too long ago. And I said, well, what happened? Was there an epiphany? And I really had to think about this. The answer is no. I never disengaged. Again, I know history. It was church guys that would, when we were fighting something, trying to develop this idea called the United States of America, history teaches us pastors would preach in their pulpits, and then they would go get their muskets, their guns, and they would go out and they would fight these guys across the pond that was trying to dominate us over here. That was, by the way, black and white alike, that there was an emergence. We said, hey, wait, we want this thing called the United States. We don't want a government telling us what to do. I've always been engaged. I've always produced videos. I've always written on various topics. I've always engaged other leaders around the nation and outside of the nation as well. And so I never thought it strange, honestly, to quote, do something. I just began to do my own videos. There was no one quote supporting me. I was doing my own writing, and the video that Hillary Clinton was just, she was foaming at the mouth over, that really wasn't meant to go to the public at that time. I had written, and I'd love for your audience to watch that video, by the way. I took time, sat down, I produced a 5-6 minute piece. I hired a guy out of Illinois to put all the graphics together, but they were all mine. Every one, every graphic, every detail, 100%, that was me. I actually produced that video to send it to other clergy around the nation to say, hey guys, how is it that you're gonna vote for this lady? Are you guys insane? And I had some very strong language for these individuals. I said, what are you doing? Here's the history. This is what they believe. This is what they teach. How is it that you say you believe in orthodoxy of scripture, but you can vote someone who doesn't believe in traditional marriage? You can vote for someone who believes that a certain ethnic group of people are not really real. They need to be exterminated like weeds. That's Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenicist that was part of the Democratic Party. And I just simply did it. Well, that video caught a group of other individuals. And that's how I began to engage publicly, because they said, who are you? And I thought, well, I'm just Aubrey down in Tampa, Florida. And this is what people around me, they hear this all the time. So it was nothing, Jacqueline, that I was doing that was different. It was just individuals begin to catch it, and they begin to ask, hey, would you come and address this or address that? And here I am, some years later, we're just still doing what I really have been doing all along. So I didn't have an epiphany. It was just one of those moments that the right hands caught it, and they said, we just would love to hear your voice on this matter. And I was able to, and still am, I'm able to share history, not revisionist from a historical position, but pure history as it relates to this nation, black and whites alike, who did what, when, and where. And this is why I believe we're having the success that we're having regarding even this book. I really do.
History seems to be at the core of really even some of your major life choices, where you moved from Chicago, you went down to Florida, and it was because you were teaching a group on church history, and it took off, and it started a fire essentially in this.
Yeah.
And so what do you think we're missing when it comes to history? Because it's like there's this lack of context. What needs to be understood? What's missing? God, you ask phenomenal questions, and I really mean that. What I really believe, the history is there. What I really believe, though, is what I would call the second part of that question. And forgive me for going back into debate class. I feel like I'm back in debate where you ask the question to provoke the other. I think there's a lack of courage. I just do. I can tell you, I have groups of guys that reach out to me. Now, those of your audience that are familiar with biblical text, they would know the names like Nicodemus. Nicodemus was someone who would go to Yeshua or Christ at night. He didn't want to be seen with Jesus in the daytime. So I got a bunch of what I call Nicodemus friends. As a matter of fact, on my phone, when they call, whatever their title is, I actually put, if they're a bishop or pastor, I'll put
Bishop Nicodemus and their first name out there. And I tell these guys all the time, I said, you guys are lacking courage. They know that a lot of these individuals, I promise you, they know this, but I'll be very candid with you and your audience. I hear things like this. Well, if I do that, Bishop, I may lose all of my Black members, or I may lose my liberal white members. And here's a guy, I'm here in Tampa. I have 20 different ethnic groups, by the way. And they hear this stuff all the time. Now, doesn't mean I haven't ruffled some feathers. And yes, I've lost a few of the professors that were once with me because back in 2016 or 2012 rather, I was adamant against then Barack Hussein Obama. I'm a Chicago kid, well, at least a suburban Chicago kid. I knew what Jeremiah Wright taught. I knew he was an isolationist. I knew he believed in what's called Black theology. And I know where that really comes from. Dr. Cone and others that talk what the real title is, Black liberation theology. And what they teach primarily, Israel is bad, white people are bad. And you couldn't convince me that if Barack Hussein Obama sat in this guy's church for 20 years, of course he's going to believe it. He said that this was the guy that inspired him to write his book. And so I share these type of things with clergy and with leaders, not just clergy, by the way, civic leaders everywhere. I share this. And again, they know it, in my opinion, they know enough of the history to do it. My real issue, I think they're afraid. They're afraid that they're going to be canceled, and canceled in the sense of individuals leaving them, jobs closing down on them. I've taken personally a tremendous financial hit simply because I speak these truths, but I kind of count it as an honor. I'm thinking, well, if that's all that's happening to me, this is pretty cool. I'm going to keep doing it because I'm not just fighting for me. I'm fighting for all Americans, whether you're Black, white, or the color of Shrek. What do I really care? I just think we got to really fight and engage to do the things that we need to do. Our leaders are going to have to find courage. And if they do it, I really believe we'll have success. But they got to fight. They got to want to fight. They got to want to win this thing. And I don't like losing, so I'm going to keep fighting.
Quick follow-up question on that. Do you think that honor has become an excuse for church leaders to more or less not step out and not confront government officials on these issues?
I think honor, in a true sense, if it's polluted, because real honor actually will force them to do it. See, I love what St. Paul teaches. St. Paul said this, and I love quoting this. He says, everything that you do, and now he's talking again, he wasn't just talking, he was in the city of Ephesus and he was talking to a group of believers, but this was a kind of an eternal fact, truth here. He said to every believer, he says, everything that you do in word or deed, do it as you're doing it unto God. So real honor is not when I honor you, because I may put on a false face. It's like people that court. When you're courting, you put on your best, you smell your best, every hair is in place. But once you get a chance to know the individual, you get a chance to see him or her without all of the camouflage. We get a chance to see kind of who's who. Honor, properly understood, is something that we do not towards people, but we do it towards God. And when that honor's there, we'll have no problem making and suffering if that's what we have to do, or being boycotted or having doors shut on us, because this is part of what we believe in. For at least Christians, that is, when Christians pick up that cross, it's a sign of suffering. And this is why we do what we do. Now, would we like for it to pass? Oh, of course. Which one of us wake up and go, gee, I really want to suffer today? None of us, unless you have some mental challenges going on there. But the reality of it is, this is part of the narrative. If we're going to make a difference in America, you got to be willing to lose a few things.
What do you think our hope is? And I'll wrap it up with this. Last time we spoke, you carry a lot of hope. You have hope for America. What do you think our hope is as a nation moving forward when we're at such a turbulent time?
Going back to our history, going back to our DNA, how was this country founded? What principles were founded? Do a study, not you, but your audience. Find every major state. How was it founded? Go back and read its constitution. You're going to see a common theme, by the way, God. So when a people return back to the foundation of something, and in the United States of America, even though all religions are, they're saying, hey, come. But the founders, various men that founded various states, read their constitutions. I have. And when people go back to its foundation, and if the foundation has got us here, the same foundation that helped us overcome slavery, the same foundation that, even though there was a major opposition that was, a group that was for it, another group that was against it, but the foundation said, hey, that's not God. That's not how God perceives people. If America returns back to that, we'll begin to see it. Now, again, I'm not talking about going to a certain church. It's nothing to do with that. I'm talking about your core belief system. Who are you? Where did you come from? What was America really founded upon? Not the junk that you hear from Louis Farrakhan and these nut jobs. I'm talking about really understanding what America was really, really about. If we return back to that, we'll have hope because we win. And this is why you got to get in the game. You got to fight. You got to be a participant. And in doing so, we're going to turn this nation around. Hey, call me the eternal optimist. I don't really care. I just believe it can happen. I really do.
Thank you, Bishop Shines. I want to share your video that you mentioned with our audience. So if you could please send that to me, but how can our guests follow you and follow what you're doing?
Well, I would, first of all, love for your guests to go out on 8 questions about race. I got to spell out the word there, and/or they can go out to Conservative Clergy of Color. They can put in my name, aubreyshines.com. We have multiple sites doing multiple things, but if they download my name, aubreyshines.com, and/or for the book, please go out and support us at 8 questions about race. Go to Amazon, of course, as well. Follow us, like what we're doing. Again, for the book, I don't take anything for this. I use every dime that I can to educate America. That's it. That's what it's all about. Giving back into a society that we can have a great society again. So I'd love for all of your followers to come out and check us out. I think they'll be pleasantly surprised. At least I hope so.
Thank you so much, Bishop Shines. Always a
Sure.
pleasure speaking with you and a total honor to have you on today.
The honor is mine. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Got Freedom podcast. If you're not already following us on social media, you can do so on Facebook at Got Freedom 51. We're also on Twitter and Instagram. And remember to come back here next week for another episode of the Got Freedom podcast. Subscribe, and we'll see you next week.